Here.
Aldo, absent. Gore,
Here.
Jennings, absent. Sander, absent. Stallard, absent. Thomas,
Here.
Vice Chair Zaragoza,
Here.
and Chair Kennedy.
Here.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements that need to be made?
We have no announcements, but we do have a public comment under public communications. Would
Okay,
you like me to read that into the record now?
please do.
Thank you. The communication is from Kim Zering. It states, "My name is Kim Zering, and I live in Placer County with my family, which includes our adult daughter with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I wish to address the committee about the importance and need for affordable housing for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, hereinafter referred to as IDD. The majority of adults with IDD live in the family or guardian home, many with aging caregivers. At present, Alta Regional Center has close to 30,000 consumers, and the number continues to grow. With extremely low incomes and little to ability to pay rent, IDD adults transitioning out of the family home have few options for finding or sustaining community-based housing. Housing vouchers are difficult to obtain, not to mention the challenge of finding safe and suitable places to use them. Wait lists for creative desired housing models are incredibly long or closed. There are currently no dedicated set-aside units for IDD in any affordable housing location in our county of residence. There are also no affordable creative housing models for individuals with IDD in the greater Sacramento region, though such models do exist in other areas of the state. We hope to gain your support for the inclusion of a range of affordable housing options for adults with IDD as SACOG continues to work on its blueprint for the region. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this critical topic." And that concludes the public comment.
Thank you very much. And clearly, this is not agendized. We won't have a discussion on it. However, I thank the member of the public for writing in on something that I actually share your story. So thank you very much. And we will take that under advisement. And next item, please.
Thank you. Our next item is consent. It's the approval of this meeting to be held remotely.
All right. Are there any questions, comments? Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the item.
Bradford will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any member of the public?
There's no public comment.
Okay, please call the roll.
Director Bradford,
Aye.
Gallardo, absent. Gore,
Aye.
Jennings, absent. Sander, absent. Stallard, absent. Thomas,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zaragoza,
Aye.
and Chair Kennedy.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item is information item number 2, pricing strategies and tolling in the Sacramento region. And Christina Svensk has the presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to do a quick overview, talk a little bit about pricing. As a reminder, we've
Christina.
Sorry, thank you. So we're going to do an overview on pricing, which when we talk about pricing, there's a lot of different strategies that we can employ, but today we're going to be focusing specifically on tolling in the Sacramento region. This is an item that we've put in front of you all a few times over the last year. We've got Autumn here today to talk a little bit about YOLO 80, managed lanes, and the progress that's been happening there. And I know we've spoken about generalized kind of tolling and pricing concepts before. So we're just kind of keeping that momentum and keeping this in front, top of mind as there are projects that are continuing to move forward. So as I mentioned, pricing strategies can include a whole host of different strategies, tolls or express lanes as they're commonly referred to, mileage-based user fees and parking charges are some of the more familiar concepts, and we talk about these in our MTP SES, which I'll bring up in the next few slides. There's a lot of tolling projects that have been implemented across California and the country. If you've been to the Bay Area, you've seen a number of express lanes there. Southern California also as well has a lot of express lane networks down there. So we're sort of following suit with what has already been happening in California and the country as well. And there's multiple ongoing studies for the corridors in the Sacramento region. So today, as I mentioned, Autumn will talk about the progress on YOLO 80, but there's also some plans moving forward for the I-5 corridor as well with Caltrans. So our 2020 MTP SES talks about pricings and have identified express lanes as a viable strategy. And that includes improving traffic management, increasing the reliability of the system, expanding modal choice because there's a strong linkage here between transit when we're talking about managed lanes and toll lanes, and generally increasing the throughput of both not just travelers, but freight as well. It's an important component of the network overall. There's three different concepts related to the tolling that we've talked about in our MTP. There's the idea of a single high occupancy toll lane or a hot lane. And this is where there's a lane that's tolled for single occupancy vehicles, but if you are a carpool, you can use the lane for free of charge. That's something you see in the Bay Area quite a bit. There's also multi-lane configurations where we have a managed lane and or repurposing existing lanes or shoulders. So there's 2 tolled right-of-way lanes and then 2 general purpose lanes. And then dynamic pricing, which is where the tolls change based on the time of the day and the demand. So it's very much a demand-based system. So in our MTP SES from 2020, we do identify some specific corridors for these different concepts for tolling. So you can see here both I-5 and YOLO 80 are on there, as well as other segments of Interstate 80, State Route 99, State Route 65, and Capital City Freeway, which is State Route 51, which is part of that connector between 80 and 50. There's other state policies and programs that we do have to think about, and a lot of these are kind of in development right now, so we can't talk a ton about them, but the carbon reduction program, we have the regional funds that we just took in front of you a few months ago to adopt our strategy, but there's also a state pot of money, and the state has determined that they want to use those funds to convert existing lanes to priced or tolled lanes. So that is how the state is planning to distribute out or administer the state portion of the funding. The guidelines haven't been finalized yet, but I believe those are coming out September or October. And then subsequently, there'll be a call for projects through that funding. Caltrans is also developing what's called a Deputy Directive 43-R2, and it's something that really just kind of guides the higher overarching policies for managed lane facilities. That is also in development right now and is about to be finalized. So we're awaiting that. But part of that is requiring Caltrans to develop a managed lane system plan. That is also in development right now, and we've been providing comments and been a part of that. So these are things that we have to keep in mind as we go through our process. But the big question is, okay, now that we have all these plans for managed lanes, how are we going to actually implement them? And this is where the discussion is sort of at right now in the region. There are 2 main pieces of guiding code and legislation, Assembly Bill 194, and then the California Streets and Highways Code has a section specific to this. And essentially it lays out how you would implement it, which is you need to start a tolling authority. And so that requires an application to be submitted to the CTC, and there's 3 ways to do it. The RTPA could submit only and be a regional tolling authority. There can be a JPA developed that is done with the consent of the RTPA, or Caltrans can submit a tolling authority application. So as I mentioned, there's some current regional projects and there has been some development in these discussions about implementation of them. And so I am going to hand it over to Autumn right now to talk about where YOLO 80 is in that. Yes, but you'll want that.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Is that working?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Hi, Autumn Bernstein, Executive Director of the YOLO Transportation District. I know you've seen some presentations from me before, so I'm not going to bore you with the same old spiel, but really provide some updates in terms of some of the work that we've been doing that I think is very relevant to this question of how do we kind of move forward tolling for the region as well as for our project. So just a quick reminder, this is the project we're talking about, basically the entire stretch of Interstate 80 county line to county line in Yolo County. The existing conditions, this is the only stretch of I-80 that's less than 4 lanes between San Francisco and Roseville, including Yolo County and eastern Solano County. It's the only stretch, so no surprise, right? That it's the bottleneck. There's new lanes under construction to our west in Solano County and of course on Highway 50 in Sacramento County as well. So we anticipate that based on that the bottleneck is only going to get worse as the freeway is widened on both sides. Currently,
Ask a quick question.
sure.
Those expansion areas, those are not managed lanes, or are they going to be managed lanes?
Great question. On the Solano side, it is going to be a toll lane. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, on Highway 50, I believe it's a carpool lane, although I'd have to confirm with someone here.
I have a question about the managed lanes in Solano County too, and that's outside the scope of what you're talking about, but I've noticed that currently at least the work they're doing ends in Vacaville and doesn't continue onto the Yolo County line.
That's correct.
Is that gap getting done as well, or?
Yeah, so that you're absolutely right. So it stops at 505 in Vacaville. Solano County is actually initiating at what's called a PDT for the stretch between the Yolo County line and 505. So they are starting to do that planning, but it's definitely behind.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. Currently, it takes 12 minutes when there's no traffic to get across the Yolo bypass. It's when there is traffic, the average traffic, it's 22 minutes. We all know it can be worse than that. And by 2049, the SACSIM model predicts it's going to be 3 to 4 times longer. So that's actually 99 minutes is the number that it predicts. That's basically Friday afternoon on steroids every day. So that's
was a non-congested time, honestly.
That is
Because it's no time I've ever been through there has there not been congestion there.
So that's what happens if we do nothing. That's just based on background population growth and economic growth in the Northern California region. Next slide. So this project's a partnership between us and Caltrans. It's one new managed lane each way and no widening of the existing causeway structure. So this is the price tag. The last time I spoke to you, we were crossing our fingers that we were going to get $103 million from the California Transportation Commission. We did not. We were not recommended for funding. So we currently have a phase 1 funding gap of $138 million. We do have a significant chunk of money from the federal government, $86 million, that we have to obligate by next fall. So we are working very hard right now to both raise some additional funding and also downsize our phase 1 project so that we don't lose those federal funds. They are use it or lose it. There is no flexibility. And so we're working to figure out what a smaller project looks like and fill that gap so that we can build something that is an interim project on the way to the full project that we're envisioning. But in the meantime, we did receive, and we're really grateful from this board, $3 million in tolling advance planning funding as part of the last funding round. And that work is what I'm going to talk about right now because I think it's quite relevant to the broader regional picture. So what this slide shows on the top is a typical highway development process in blue. That's the blue arrow. And where we are is we're in the project approval environmental document phase. We're waiting for our EIR to be released from Caltrans. And then the next line that follows the gray arrow, that's the price managed lanes delivery process. It's much more complicated. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of things that need to happen. We are currently doing strategic planning, which is that little green box in the lower left corner of the gray arrow. Then the third one breaks that out and says, these are all the pieces that we're doing right now in order to try to kind of catch up, if you will, and say, what is our plan for tolling on this corridor? And some of that means that we're making decisions that would have impacts on future projects in the region. So policy, design, contracting, transit, are all different pieces of this. And then, of course, the question of governance as well. And so this is just language from best practices that we should be engaging decision makers and stakeholders in an interactive process to figure out what it is we want to do when we're making decisions on managed lanes. So Because we're the first project in the region, we have pulled together this regional toll policy working group that includes all the organizations that you see here. Matt Click from Placer County is here. Woody Deloria from El Dorado County is part of that group, as is Kevin Busey from STA, along with SACOG and Caltrans District 3 staff. And we are working to basically gather input on the decisions that we need to make for our project, but recognizing again that they will have implications for the rest of the region. So what I want to do is just kind of catch you up with, this group has now met 3 times over the last couple of months, and just kind of catch you up on where we are. So, sure.
Sorry, thank you. Director Saragosa has his hand raised. Would you like to take his question now, or?
Yes, please.
Director Saragosa, if you can hear me, we welcome your comment if you'd still like to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. My question was on the funding from CTC that didn't happen. Did they provide feedback as to why, you know, the funding didn't come through? I'm just trying to get more context on that. And then is there a chance for on future funding rounds? I would assume there would be, but we're just looking for more context on that. Obviously, that's a big chunk of funding, so wanted to delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks for the question. We did get some feedback. The program that we applied for, the Trade Corridor Enhancements Program, is one that's very much focused on freight corridors. And that the decision to make that, to apply for that as opposed to other funding programs, had to do with how much money was available and the thought that it was going to be frankly less competitive than some other pots of money that might have been a better fit for this particular project. Because the focus is on freight, we really needed to demonstrate freight benefit. And this, of course, is an important freight corridor. The feedback that we received, that we were asking for a very big chunk of money for this pot, $103 million, was a very large amount. And that we didn't do a good enough job of demonstrating the freight benefits. We talked a lot about congestion. We talked a lot about equity. We talked about other factors, and they felt that we didn't do enough to emphasize the freight benefits. So. But they emphasize that it's just a very competitive pot of funding. Of course, as they always say that, don't they? But that's the feedback that they gave us. We are looking at some opportunities to, with the CTC, when they gave us that feedback, they did tell us that there's a silver lining, that there may be some options to advance funding from future SB1 funds. And so that's a conversation that we are starting to have with them. Because we have federal money on the line and there's concern about losing that federal money, there's some provisions that could allow the CTC to front load funds from a future round in order to not jeopardize those federal funds. So we're in conversation with them about that. Nothing at all is set in stone, but we're knocking on wood that we can find a path forward.
Understood. What's the time frame for the federal funds? I mean, what's our drop dead date in terms of, you know, where we would lose them?
Yeah, they have to be obligated by September 2024. And what that means is that we basically have to submit a plan that says we're ready to go out to bid for construction essentially by next April. So it's very, very short time frame. And, you know, we're just still at the draft EIR phase. So we've got a heavy lift for sure. We're also the first project in the region that Caltrans is implementing their new vehicle miles traveled requirements under CEQA. And so that there's been a lot of scrutiny paid from headquarters to make sure that this project is rolling out in a way that they feel comfortable with. So we've had a lot of back and forth, and the EIR is quite delayed at this point. So that's another challenge that the project has.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Great. Go ahead. Okay. So some of the toll policy considerations that we're talking about, these are, again, things for our project, but that we know once we have one project in the region, this could influence what happens elsewhere in the region. Like, what are the hours of operation? Do we want to do it like dynamic pricing? In other words, where the price changes based on the actual demand in real time? Or would we want to have sort of a set schedule of pricing that based on what we know to be the existing travel patterns? What's the minimum toll? What's the maximum toll? And who do we want to give exemptions to? You know, carpools, buses, trucks, clean air vehicles, motorcycles. These are some of the questions that we're grappling with there in terms of policy. Then there's things around design consideration. You know, this has to do with like enforcement, like making sure that CHP has places that they can get out if they need to, you know, to enforce if there's people that are, you know, violating. You know, where are you going to put your signs? How are you separating the lane from the other lanes? That's a big issue in terms of making sure that people aren't just kind of weaving in and out of the lane to avoid the, you know, the detectors where they have to pay, which can then cause safety issues, right? So those are some of the considerations we're talking about there. Contracting for the toll system, there's just a lot of contracting that's involved. You have to have a customer service center, right? You have to have a financial back office that is, sending people bills in the mail, for example, if they went through the lane and didn't have enough cash in their fast track account, as well as traffic management. So there's a lot of contracting that's involved, and it's an important piece to think about. Again, particularly as the first project in the region, this is boring stuff, but it's really important because if we enter long-term contracts for our facility.
We're SACOG board members.
You're-
We're good with boring.
I'm talking to the right crowd.
We're used to it.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
We're used to it.
So if I sign a long-term contract with a financial back office, and then, 10 years from now, Matt wants to, to build a lane, in Placer County, is he going to be stuck? Is he going to want to go out and get out his own contract, or is he going to want to piggyback on my contract, right? And so that's why it's important to think about, because these are long-term contracts. They're very big contracts. One of the things that we can do is we could actually, rather than start from scratch, we could also piggyback on like MTC, for example, or even Orange County or Los Angeles, their systems, because it's all done electronically anyway. It doesn't actually matter where those systems are located. So, as we think about it, if we have something that's more custom, that's more our own thing, that's going to be more expensive and kind of more problematic. Whereas if we kind of glom onto somebody else's existing system, we're sort of, it might be easier and cheaper, but we would then be stuck with whatever commitments they've already made, right? So if we wanted to just join MTC, for example, and join their toll system, everything that comes along, all the decisions that they've made, we're stuck with those, right? At least for as long as those contracts are in place, and then we'd be one voice of many when it comes around to update those contracts. So those are some of the things that we're kind of debating, and I wouldn't even say debating, just exploring as part of this process. And then lastly is governance. So the way that toll lanes are governed in California, it's outlined in Section 149 of the Government Code. Basically, RTPAs, and in our case, SACOG is our RTPA. We are not a standalone RTPA. They are the ones who are sort of have an important role to play at the local level in determining tolling governance. There's got to be so we as a local agency, of course, want to have oversight ourselves as well in how this is done. But the governance structure is important because it's ultimately the governing body is going to make those decisions about the toll policy. How much are the tolls? What happens if you violate? What's the enforcement? All those sorts of things, as well as how are those toll revenues going to be used? How are they going to be reinvested? So the whoever the governing body ultimately is for this project and for other projects, it's going to have a lot of important influence. So we have started having those kind of conversations again with our regional partners, as well as Caltrans about what sort of a governance structure we would like. Do we want it to be just for Yolo County at this point, or do we want to think about Sacramento County, which is also exploring tolling for I-5? What about, would we want to have a system where Placer and El Dorado at some point could join if they felt like that was something they wanted to do? What's SACOG's role as the RTPA and MPO? What's our role as a local agency? What's Caltrans' role? So those are all the conversations that we're having right now at a staff level. But we're not anywhere close to having a proposal at this time. But I wanted to make sure you're aware that those conversations are happening. And I think that might be my last slide. Oh, lastly to say, all of this has to culminate in an application to the California Transportation Commission for toll authority, where we provide a bunch of evidence that we think that our lane is going to work, that it's financially viable, and that we have a governance structure, and that we have essentially a plan that the CTC can say, yes, we grant you tolling authority because we think you've done your homework, and you have our blessing to move forward and do tolling. So this just kind of shares what that process looks like, and I think that's it. So happy to answer questions.
Questions?
Yeah, through the chair. This might be too far in the weeds, but I know some of the things that are being talked about, for example, 24/7, which some of that probably makes sense given a lot of the congestion is on the weekends. If you combine that with dynamic pricing, are there instances where dynamic pricing actually can go to zero when there's no congestion? And then when there is congestion, it can work its way up?
I think anything's possible. Yeah, absolutely. I think most of the facilities that we see in Northern California right now are not 24/7, and they do it's free for all when the system is shut down, and that they're really only start and end kind of when the traffic starts to pick up and end. And there's advantages to having it being able to shut the system off, because as long as the system is on, you're paying for monitoring of that system and collection and anything else that might be going on. So even though you're probably, the cost of operating the system might be not worth the, the amount of revenue that you're gaining during those times. But I certainly think that weekend tolling is something we will have to look at on this quarter. Currently, nowhere in the Bay Area are they doing weekend tolling. And in fact, their ordinance says they can't do tolling on the weekends. So for example, if we were to join MTC's system, they would have to change their ordinance to allow us to do weekend
Oh.
tolling.
Yeah, I know just from personal experience, yeah, and I mean, I'm sure everyone else, that weekends are definitely congestion across the causeway, so. Yeah, yeah. So, great, thank you.
Thank you. So a couple things. One is the $380 million or so cost. How much of that is get it going, and how much is that is operational costs down the road, or is it going to expect to pay for itself through the tolling?
Yeah, it's a good question. Caltrans has done an initial study of traffic and revenue, which is basically it's the study that's done to sort of look at, is tolling feasible, financially feasible? And it does show that it would be financially self-sustaining. They didn't even include weekend tolling in the analysis they did, because they used the SACSIM model, which doesn't include weekends. But I should say, in not every scenario, but in most scenarios, they found that tolling was viable and that the system would support itself eventually. But a big question around that is whether or not we're able to completely fund the project out of grant funding, or if we may have to end up actually bonding against future toll revenue in order to construct the project, which is a thing that tolling projects can do, but then it means that it sucks up, a lot of the toll revenue for the long term, for, at least until those loans are paid off.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone online? All right.
Chair Kennedy, just to round this out, and I really want to thank Autumn for being here, and also for Matt Click and our partners, as Autumn was mentioning. So we're not only was tolling in our last plan, thanks to Director Sander, who led the board during that, many workshops. There's actually 20 board members at SACOG now who were not here when we adopted the last plan. So a reminder, in some ways, what we're doing is just warming you back up to what was already accomplished in the last plan. And now we actually, unlike the last plan, we have projects, right? And so that's what we're trying to bring in front of you. There are these near-term opportunities. And there are, I know Autumn laid out a number of things, as did Christina, for you today, but one of which is this region will have to set up a tolling authority. In order to have toll facilities, we need a toll authority, and SACOG has, as you heard, a role in that, but we don't want to have the exclusive role. We want it to be a partnership, try to figure out how to do that across the region, how to do it fairly. And those governance questions, I know you're all are going to have a lot of thoughts about, and you want to have some input on, because we've got to figure out how to make it work. We don't really want a system where we have individual toll authorities across the region, all with different ways it works and, policy and everything else. But it's always that tension, that push-pull, right, between, as Autumn just said, local revenue, local decision-making, where that's even our 6 county, feeling some ownership. And then even in the mega region, Director Gore, right, actually seeing what kind of economy of scale could we get, perhaps partnering with MTC, for example, in the Bay Area. So this is coming. It's going to be really important. We're just warming you up again, and really appreciate Autumn coming back. We will be back in front of you, and as much as you need and want other briefings on how this works and some of the key decision points, happy to keep that in front of the board.
Go ahead.
I have another question just to follow up on what you said about if we were to contract out with another entity to provide the services for the tolling, that they would have to change their structure, et cetera, for ours, right? So I think to Gary's point, or Supervisor Bradford's point, is that in that area, it would make sense to have weekend tolling to some extent, right? Because that's when everyone's traveling between the regions. And would all of those have to actually change their procedures, or couldn't they just adopt something different for a different roadway?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't want to oversimplify. I will say we've been having conversations with MTC about this, and they're not sure. They're not sure what would need to change. I think it would depend in part on which contracts we use of theirs. It may be that if we use some of their contracts but not others, we wouldn't need to. So I think the answer is I am not the expert in this, and it sounds like it's complicated.
All right, thank you.
I do think that as all of us, and I see Director Sander has his hand raised. You know, you say oversimplify. I think that was exactly what I was thinking as far as the governance piece. Easy just to say, you know, we got to do this. I think it's going to be harder than we think it is. Who makes the ultimate decision on what the governance looks like?
Feel free to jump in.
I
Go ahead.
I can jump in on
I was
that
going
one.
to direct it to it.
So ultimately, it would be the boards of whichever agencies are part of that authority. So SACOG has to have a role unless Caltrans were to just submit the application. But because SACOG's the RTPA for Yolo and Sacramento counties, SACOG either has to be part of a JPA or consenting to the JPA or has to submit the application itself. So then when you form that authority board, that's just a contractual arrangement that everyone agrees on. So that's ultimately where between SACOG and whatever partners are part of that board, we'd all have to agree on this is what the board structure looks like. This is who gets appointed to the board, et cetera, et cetera. But under the JPA law, you have carte blanche to decide how that works. So it doesn't like have to be 5 members or 10 members or something like that. It's really up to the board. And that's where we as staff are going to be coming back to all of you, looking for direction as to how you want to see that constructed.
Thank you. Director Sander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, it's hard for me to believe this has been out there as long as it has. I think the original context that we even brought up tolling was with regard to the Capital Southeast Connector. And the idea that perhaps you could put a toll booth on either end of it and capture the, 10 or 15% of drivers who'd be going end to end, make them pay, but local traffic not have to pay. That was sort of the original concept, I think, that got floated at SACOG. And the interesting feedback was that people didn't want to wait in line at a toll booth. And of course, the technology was there then that you would just do license plate reading. And we're all, I think, familiar with that now. So I think, SACOG, when we first incorporated this, definitely had the attitude that there is not adequate funding for transportation. There will likely never be adequate funding for transportation from the sources we know of at the federal level and the state level. Even with enormous new inputs of federal transportation money, we still don't have enough transportation funding just to maintain what we have. So finding additional revenues from some other source makes a lot of sense. And this is an opt-in, not a mandatory one. So it's of interest. I think there's, though, a lot of, the devil's in the details issues here. So how this thing is structured, where revenues go, what restrictions may be in place from Caltrans or from strings and attachments to the infra grant. I think those are going to be worthy of some sort of exploration, as well as a little visionary thinking about where we're going next. It's news to me that Sacramento County is interested in doing this on I-5 somewhere. I was unaware of that. That sort of changes where I thought where we might be headed in terms of governance. But I think this is an issue we're going to have to continue to revisit and be sure and educate our newer members about in some detail.
And Director Sander, I'm going to let Christina too. I just want to clarify when we say Sacramento County, in this case, we mean a project within Sacramento County. I don't want to misspeak. I mean, quite honestly, right? So I-5 is just another facility. Caltrans, who we really wanted to be here today, but they had multiple competing conflicts, is leading the I-5 project. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So,
correct. They're going after a mega grant, I believe, which is why they can't be here today. They're going to the Board of Supervisors tomorrow for the I-5 to further study that and look at their plans for that.
So it's not to say that the county doesn't support. I just want to make sure, because I know
Yeah.
that
I
when we say
appreciate the
Sacramento
clarification.
County, it has numerous, we're talking about a project within the county, but perhaps where the county would partner with Caltrans to submit a federal grant application.
Right.
But the point is, it's coming, right? As it's been said, we've been saying coming soon for quite some time. Well, the soon is approaching. And so we appreciate the input so far today, because it's exactly how we want to get your wheels as relatively the executive committee, strategic planning committee, turning on how to do this, and the devil is in the details. We need to take a regional approach. We want to make sure the different agencies, the different counties feel they're invested, even if they don't necessarily have a project right ready to go as these two are, but they are, again, they are coming.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Next item, agenda item number 3, is an information item, 2025 Blueprint Development Update and Key Topic Area Discussion, and Casey Lazam will provide the presentation.
Thank you, Lynette. Good afternoon, Chair Kennedy, members of the committee. We have just finished up a phase of the blueprint update, your 2025 blueprint plan, and we're about to enter the next one. So this is a time that we want to take to make sure that the Strategic Planning Committee is apprised of the big engagements and the issues over the next year in the blueprint update. And so we are looking for today specifically for some feedback and direction from the committee to guide staff as we develop the work plan for engaging the board, our partner agencies, and stakeholders over the next year plus. So what I want to do first is just to remind us and ground us in what the blueprint is, and then I've got some issues that I want to talk through, and I'll be looking for some feedback from you on this. So the blueprint is the region's metropolitan transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. We know that, yes. It's a transportation plan, right? That means that every project in that transportation plan that's in there, it's in there because it may be wanting to get federal and state funding to be built and operated, and or it could have an impact on regional air quality, right? So that's plan or projects that are in there, that's how they get to move forward under state and federal law. It's a land use plan. It's a forecast of where the region is likely to add new people, jobs, housing, and the shape of all that development. That's all to help determine the transportation projects that are included in the plan. And as a plan that is adopted by the SACOG board, it is the region's collective vision for what the region's going to look like by 2050. So that's the plan part of it. To ground it in, like, again, why do we care about it? Well, the item that you just heard on tolling is an implementation activity of your current MTP. So all of the work that you do, all of the decisions that you're making at SACOG during and after a plan update are really implementing whatever your plan is. So Green Means Go came out of the 2020 plan. The funding rounds, all of the different funding rounds that we have are always implementations of the regional plan, the next generation transit strategy. So I just want to make sure to remind us, like, this plan, it is a plan for the future, and we try to figure out how do we implement it. And so all the activity we do implements it. So with that reminder, what the board has done so far for this blueprint update, you adopted a policy framework for the blueprint that says it is going to advance the triple bottom line. So just as a reminder, the triple bottom line, those 3 specific goals that you have in your policy framework: equity, which is a just and inclusive region where government makes investments for and with historically marginalized communities, so race can no longer be used to predict health or economic outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. Economy, a diversified regional economy in which all people have access to resources that give them the opportunity to realize their full potential. And then environment, a safe and resilient region for all residents where natural resources and air quality are sustainably managed so people can thrive here for generations. Just want to remind you of that, of all of those 3 goals. They're the triple bottom line. So you said we want to develop a plan that's going to advance all 3 of these equally. So given that we're moving into the next phase, as we look at the year ahead, staff sees 6 main issues that we think are important for getting us to a plan that can achieve that triple bottom line and meet the federal and state requirements of this plan, of which there are many. So the 6 main issues that we see, and we'll go through them one by one, but just so that you know where we're going: engagement, equity, land use, pricing and tolling, which you're warmed up on that one, revenue, and prioritization. So I'm going to talk through each of them one at a time. I'm going to briefly, I want to pause and I've got a question for all of you to get your feedback on this. So the first of these is engagement. When the board decided to extend the schedule of the plan via AB 350, a lot of that was, look, we want to take the time to really be able to engage all of the partners and stakeholders in the region so that this is a plan that they all can see themselves in, they all are part of. So what we've done so far, we kicked off with tours to all of the city councils and boards of supervisors in the region to just introduce them to the fact that we're doing this plan, starting to get some input. We partnered with Valley Vision to do the built environment poll, of which you heard the results of at your June Blueprint workshop. We've had lots of surveys go out, and I know that there was an update on outreach at the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee meeting, but lots of surveys. And this time around, we partnered with community-based organizations. We had mini grants for them to really try to target communities that have been, again, historically marginalized or historically just are hard to reach, don't participate in public processes. We held focus groups on key topics that were going to be included in the plan to, again, try to understand what's important to people, what resonates with people. The pop-up workshops that we've had at least one in every city and county. Those are concluding early this month, and we have used that to, again, raise awareness of the blueprint and to take surveys again on what's important to people. And then, of course, the June 16th event with regional leaders. Now, staff is presently digesting all of that information. We're going to be sharing it with this board so that you can digest this information to figure out how is that going to be informing the next phases of the plan. And then next year, looking ahead, we are focusing a lot of our engagement on your colleagues on your boards and councils. So in early 2024, this is an opt-in, an invitation for us to come out to any city council, any board of supervisors to provide an update on the blueprint so far, what we're seeing, and have a conversation about that. And then leading into 2024 summer, we want to hold county convenings of cities and city councils and the board of supervisors there to start to look at what should go into the preferred scenario. So the draft transportation investment package and land use forecast. And then in early 2025, once we have gotten through, hopefully, to the development of that draft preferred scenario, we want to do a tour again to each board and council to talk about the path to implementation. What does that look like in each city and county? How does each city and county see themselves as implementing this regional plan? So the question we have for you today, as we lay out this high-level plan for you, is we are working hard to meaningfully engage our traditional partners, expanding our outreach to new stakeholders. We know that we can always do better. We may have missed something as we look ahead. Does the committee have feedback on our engagement efforts to date? And do you have any feedback on what I've said we plan to do over the next 12 months? And I'll pause there to see if there is any feedback.
Questions, comments?
Through the chair. So I definitely appreciate you coming and working with all of our colleagues. I think having buy-in from our colleagues is really important to implementation of the blueprint, and not just buy-in, but understanding and input. And so I think that's tremendously important. I'm not sure how the various pop-ups turned out, but it will be interesting to see what worked, what didn't work, both location, type of event. You know I stopped by 2 that were in Yuba County. One was minuscule as far as attendance. The other I heard positive things about. So, just kind of what works, and do more of what works, right? And maybe do less of what doesn't work.
That's good.
Director Bradford,
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Director Thomas.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for all of your efforts so far. That is a Herculean effort to reach our vast region and get community engagement. And I'd be, eager to hear from you following Director Bradford's comments as to what types of community engagements have you seen has been the most successful? Because I agree, the pop-ups, I'm not quite sure about the effectiveness of the pop-ups and reaching a broader population. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on those. I thought you got tremendous turnout on the workshop. That was, really great. I would love for you to come to El Dorado County in 2024. So I definitely want to opt into that and have a discussion at the board level and bring the community, because I am concerned that our residents are going to say, I haven't heard about this. I don't quite know how to fix that. So anyway, just really appreciate your efforts recognizing how immense this is, but also how important it is for the general public to feel that they've had a chance to engage.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just maybe to add on to what I said earlier, a suggestion particularly related to pop-ups and how successful they were or weren't. But potentially mini workshops in each of the counties, like in the evening. I know like in Yuba County, you could use our board chambers in Marysville. We could really try to get the public to come and provide input in a kind of a known time and location. I don't know if it'd be successful. You might have one person, you might have 100 people. Well, you probably won't have 100 people, but you might get 25, you might get one. I don't know, but it might be a good opportunity at some point in the process. And I imagine other jurisdictions might be similar. And you could even combine, Yuba and Sutter actually, and do it combined, so.
A follow-up question, that is, have you done, I know you've probably done some polling, but have you done like online workshops? Because what we have found is that people will show up to an online workshop, but they will not show up in person. And I can get hundreds of people on an online town hall, but they're not showing up in person.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we haven't thought about this, but I really do think that might make sense. And it might make sense to do it regionally, like in Placer County, focus on those jurisdictions, same with like Yuba and Sutter, Sacramento. But people will, at least more so, people have told me I'm watching your presentation while I eat dinner, but they were interested, but they weren't gonna drive 15 minutes on a hot evening.
That's a really interesting point, and I actually am just looking to do a town hall in one of the neighborhoods, and I actually asked the neighborhood, what's the preferred venue for this? Do you want to do it? We're going to talk about emergency evacuation for this particular neighborhood. They have some concerns about it. Do you want to meet at the park? Do you want to meet at a school? Or do you want to meet on Zoom? And out of the like 500 people that are in this Facebook group, 60 answered the poll. 81% said Zoom is how they wanted to have the meeting, which I actually was a little surprised by. Because to me, like meeting at a school or a park is just so much more personal and engaging and interactive, but it goes back to the convenience factor, and so there's high demand for that.
Yeah, very good.
I have one question. What's your feedback, staff's feedback from the success of the Folsom event? I mean, was it helpful? Did you get the information you were looking for?
It was very helpful. It was very rich feedback, and that's why I don't have that for you just yet, because we are still going through all of that to process it and synthesize it. But what we got to hear is what's important to people, and what did they, what's valuable to people, what do they see for the future, and then what are the things that they would want to do to help get to that future. At that level of principles and values, that's huge at this point in the process. And really, all of the feedback all of the outreach that I walked us through to this point has been about kind of what's important to you and what do you want to do, or what would you want to see your government do to advance that, take care of whatever it is that's important to you.
I get my second question would be on the focus groups.
Yeah.
How many did we do roughly, and how were they conducted? Who was the participants?
Do you have the?
Pretty sure, Chair Kennedy, we had, and we haven't done this before, we did 4 focus groups. They were on a number of issues that we thought we want to kind of dig into. So we had the poll, right? And you all know this.
Yep.
This is, you live in this world. You dig in behind some interesting things and you kind of go deeper. So we actually had pricing and tolling was one of those. How do generally people don't like that idea if they haven't seen it. I think housing and health, and we also did 2 in Spanish. So we're still getting all of those and getting our consultant to digest them. I think we have a draft of those kinds of findings, so stay tuned for that. Also, just in the land use committee last week, we did have a staff report. Initial takeaways from the Folsom event, which I think is very nicely done. So that'll probably get rolled up into your board packet coming. So we can certainly share that too. I will just say also, just to go back on engagement, and this is not by way of saying, hey, we've succeeded, right? But we've never gone to every board and council before, and we did all 28. Again, as a kickoff, right? Those were all preliminary. We've done pop-ups now in 27 of 28. I think we've got a Wheatland one now scheduled. Everyone, great question. How effective are they? The whole idea of pop-ups, as you know, is just we don't want to hold a hearing here in downtown Sacramento, have nobody show up. And those the online surveys with those mini grants, we've had more surveys completed than ever of any plan we've ever done, right? So they're all little bits of maybe imperfect information, but I do think the good news is we're learning a lot, we're getting more input, we're getting more feedback. Exactly what that feedback says and how we're going to incorporate it, stay tuned.
Yeah.
So far anyway, and we haven't suggested doing every single board and council next year because it is labor intensive, just to schedule everything. But we're offering an open invitation. Director Thomas, we hear you. But maybe that's a workshop, right? Maybe rather than go to your board and council, it's something that's a little bit more engaging, and we're just going to switch up the format a little bit.
A workshop, I think, is actually at least up in my area, probably a better approach.
Yeah.
And again, you could do a combined workshop with elected officials from multiple jurisdictions in an area. They just all have to agendize it, but it's. I mean, I know you're looking for discussion, right, and feedback. And our board meetings, culture is not a lot of discussion during board meetings. Workshop could be a very different situation. So,
got it.
Yeah, that would definitely work for El Dorado County and Placerville. We could easily do that together.
I agree. I think you're going to get better
Are you
input.
on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better input, right? If you have, in Placer County, all the city representatives plus county, right? Because transportation projects are interrelated. And so you're going to get, I think, a lot better feedback. Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Thank you. One thing that we have learned to add on about some of the things that did work really well, the CBO mini grants were to pay those community-based organizations to do targeted outreach and get their constituents to fill out surveys. That worked out really well, actually. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned to that there that could be applied, and expanded for a lot of other things. We're still kind of debriefing on all of that, but we got a lot of the surveys that we received were from that direct outreach and the help with actually translating. What do we mean by some of the policies that we're talking about in here? So looking forward to more there.
Anyone online? All right.
Great. All right.
You get what you needed?
Yes, on that topic, yes.
Okay.
They probably won't all take that much time, but honestly, we'll take everything that you have for us. So
It's a good
next,
thing.
yes. Next one is equity. Did it die? Thank you. Okay, there we go. Okay, so equity is the other big topic. You have it as one of the E's in your triple bottom line. The board adopted a racial equity statement and a racial equity action plan, really trying to listen and learn and include all of the diverse communities of this region in the work that SACOG does. So some things that we have done so far. As I said, we did the CBO partnerships with those mini grants. That is directly applying that listen and learn commitment from your racial equity statement. We did a public health analysis of the pathways. Those are the scenarios for 2050, and that public health analysis was presented to the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee just last week. Looking at the public health outcomes of the different built environments that we have under the pathways to understand, we know that there are disparities by public health, so how does that affect them? How does it affect disparities by race, ethnicity, income, ability, et cetera? And then looking forward, we are going to try for the first time to look at how the plan affirmatively furthers fair housing. So that will be evaluating the extent to which the land use plan of the blueprint has attainable housing in high opportunity areas. So it's an analysis of that because this is all built up from local land use plans. So all of your local plans. So we'll be looking at how is that working? How is that helping to achieve the equity goal in your triple bottom line? So those are three things that we have ahead in addition to the robust outreach that we've just talked about. And could you move forward, please? Thank you. And so the question I have for you here is, do you have input for how equity can be adequately and appropriately incorporated into the blueprint beyond what I've just described, particularly given the board's recent adoption of its racial equity statement and its action plan?
That's a big question.
Yeah, well, I did say these are the issues that are going to come forward. So if you don't have feedback right now, that's okay too. But we wanted to make sure that we're laying this out for you because we think it's important before we dig into it.
Comments, questions? As I said, a big question. I
This is
believe-
the hard part.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, speaking quite frankly, every agency I serve on, maybe without exception, has done some sort of an equity statement, equity initiative. How many of them actually have done something practical with that? Maybe none. This is really hard. And I kind of suggested, I think at our last board meeting, it's even harder for us because we are in such a technical business.
Director Sander, you and I have talked about this quite a bit over the years, and I know the staff appreciates your comments there, right? As you remember, we did not want to just draft a statement and release it in 2020. And I will just, for those of you not on the Race Equity Inclusion Working Group, which I think is actually most of you here, it'll probably roll up again just into your board packet for August 17th. But for the Racial Equity Action Plan, I will commend, these are all small steps, but staff has done a really nice progress report. Here's everything we said we would do in the Racial Equity Action Plan. How are we doing? And really trying to measure ourselves, hold ourselves a little bit accountable. It's very visual. Staff here is very engaged in this. So that is not, I think, answering the bigger question, Director Sander, of are we actually having a meaningful impact on people's lives and truly reducing those disparities? But it is a way in which we're trying to say, how are we doing on the things we said we would do?
Right. I'm going to give the board members here a little bit of an out in that perhaps we could better answer that question when we've seen that data and that information.
Sure. Yeah, this is not necessarily right to have answers from all of you on today, just to say, here are the big boulders coming up in the next 12, 24 months.
Great.
Okay.
Yep. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next topic, land use. So in March, April, and May, there was a lunch. I think it was May. It was May or June. Anyway, 3 times. You've had a review of land use assumptions in the 3 pathways for 2050. And a key finding in our analysis has been that there is more planned growth in the sum total of all of your local general plans and specific plans than we have projected housing growth by 2050. This is not a new dynamic. It happens every 4 years, but it is an issue that always has to be worked through. And so just to help you understand, that number is cut off the top a little bit, but if you look at just our infill areas, so these are all of our established communities and the centers and corridors and all of the green zones, the market feasible infill capacity there is over 2 times all of the projected housing growth we have for the region. So we're projecting the need for 278,000 new homes by 2050, and that bar up at the top says 760, thank you, 80,000 up at the top. So if you go to the next slide, similar thing in the developing communities. So these are all of the new specific plans, they're greenfield areas, either they are adopted and they're under construction, all the way through there's an application in, and they're working through their entitlements. So same thing there. We have in our entire region through the year 2050, we're projecting 278,000 homes needed, and we have almost 1.5 times that capacity being planned for in those developing communities. This does not include the capacity in rural residential areas and agricultural areas in the region. So we have to go through a process to assess all of the regulatory and market influences to determine what the growth forecast is going to be. We do that working very closely with your staffs. We bring that information to you over the next year. A big question, though, what we want to focus on relates to developing communities. And if you go to the next slide, please, the question is, and again, this is, we're looking partly for what questions you have, but the question is, and this is a lot, but it's a real dynamic. To what extent should the region facilitate small amounts of dispersed growth across the many developing communities, or strategically facilitate growth in a more targeted number of developing communities as a means of being more efficient with infrastructure expansion costs and accelerating the build out of more complete communities first? So the reason that question gets asked is because we know that, because we've done this with plans in the past and we've seen it in the pathways. When developing communities first start building out, they're incredibly inefficient because you have a little bit of housing, right? And then those residents are traveling very long distances, and all of the completeness that was planned for isn't there yet. But if you can see them building out more completely, right? Once they're complete, the idea is that you would see people able to take care of some of their daily needs within those communities. And so this is a question that we wanted to raise here, and what is it that you want to hear to be able to talk about this? What questions you have, what issues do you see? And I'll stop there. I know there's lots on this one.
So through the chair, it's also a difficult question. I think if you're going to build it all in my jurisdiction, then I think focusing in one area just makes a lot of sense. But I know that's not realistic, and every board member would probably share a similar statement. So it's logical why you would want to follow up on the infrastructure investments that have already been made and take advantage of those and help those communities build out. But it kind of ties back into the previous thing about equity, right? And the benefit of having that growth dispersed around the region in different places and in different jurisdictions, and the importance to all of those jurisdictions of that growth happening. So I don't know. So I don't have an answer.
Well, I think also, let's not forget, a large part of this is going to be market driven as well.
Right.
Right. So,
if you have a crystal ball, that seems to be and it sounds like you try to do that to the best of your ability, right? Is look at where do we anticipate the market will foster most of the development, right? And then align with that. Is that kind of an understanding?
Yes, and we, at some point in the next year, right, we'll be coming forward with an actual, more of a market study of the region to help to inform this. And we'll also talk through what our analysis is that we do, because it's both regulatory and it's market together. As well as policy, right? Because you have a triple bottom line. You get to decide where you want to put investment, and that influences then, what development is going to be facilitated or not. So we'll be sharing that with you. I want to just to point out some of the dynamic that happens, right? There's a lot of capacity there. We know from the past 20 years of monitoring, at least, since the blueprint, that there are specific plans that are on the books, and they've been on the books for a long time, and they don't build. And in some cases, a jurisdiction has decided in a general plan update, like, okay, we're just going to take that entitlement away. We work with the developer, the property owner, and we just revert it back to whatever it was before. And then there are cases where a project has been approved and financially it's not buildable, and so it sits for a very, very long time, right? And so those are things that we end up working out with your staffs. That's why we work very closely with them to understand what's the latest of that, latest on all of those different pieces of it, as well as all of the market feasibility part of it. So It's a real dynamic. We wanted to make sure that you're aware of it because it's going to be here a lot.
Other questions?
I just want to highlight some of the challenges in the analysis. I think we all probably have some image in our head of what greenfield development is. You're out somewhere, nothing's been built there before, but imagine that's happening with nothing else around it. Or is that happening next to one of the region's largest job centers, like adjacent to it? Are those the same greenfield developments? That kind of an X factor in the evaluation, I think, makes trying to prioritize this stuff tough. Or you're going to have something like an available jobs factor that goes into the analysis to say, yes, we agree on infill, and with regard to greenfield, maybe there ought to be a jobs component to that, a proximity to employment.
Director Sander, actually, that idea, and again, we bring this to you right now because, that's an easy question to answer. I'm just going to give you the answer right away, right? This is the complex nature of doing a regional plan that should be a strategic plan. But we've actually been asked, and this conversation is very live with these 3 pathways that are out there. Well, if we have all of these greenfield developments and they won't all build out by 2050, they just can't, because we're going to have a lot of growth, but not that much. Then from a regional perspective, where would be the places that actually would be, closer to existing services, right? People are commuting, right? We've been asked that question. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. It's not impossible to answer that, but once we start answering that question, you should all be aware and maybe be engaged in that conversation, because we really haven't, I don't think, done a sort of an analysis of all the different developing communities and from a efficiency VMT.
For this plan update, not yet.
So, and that might get your phones ringing even more than they currently are. Like, why is my development not as efficient, right? But I think it's a very valid question. That's where I was heading with that. Like, it's a very valid question. Obviously, the market will decide a lot of this, but so too will a lot of other things. And again, and some of those are policies, right? Whether they're at a regional level or a local level, or their incentives or their fee structures, right? There is policy that overlays this. And again, it's a classic regional challenge, because at a local level, you might see your corner of the region say, well, we're getting a lot of growth, and I see those new areas filling up, right? But so too does your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor, and your neighbor's neighbor's neighbor, and you add all of that up, and it's not going to happen everywhere. And so this lands on our doorstep, right? And we develop a plan, and we, not only because we want to, but frankly, we have to have a constrained plan. So as Casey was saying, we're going to be really happy if by 2050, we can build 278,000 more housing units. That is a very aggressive annual production number. And that will not fill up. Not only will it not fill up all the new development that is being planned or envisioned, anyway, so that's the challenge we have, right? We're not trying to sort of say, we like you, we don't like you. We're trying to say, how do we think about this in a thoughtful, sensible way that balances the market reality with the needs we have to have a plan that doesn't inundate us with traffic and long commutes and bad air quality and everything else.
Director Thomas.
Interesting conversation. And as we're wrestling with all of these considerations, how are we also looking at the nature of work and predicting what that's going to look like in 2050? Because as we, right now look at perhaps where we need housing close to job centers, as we all know, probably in the near future, those job centers are going to look very, very different. So what does that consideration look like in this process?
Thank you.
Yeah. One more thing. I totally agree with what Director Thomas just said. I think another thing, you all have heard me harp about this before in terms of home ownership and equity and the ability of communities of color to own homes. There's a lot of opportunities in rural areas that if we just limit the ability of new construction, there's a lot of opportunities in areas, and you're not necessarily taking prime farmland out of rotation. There are lots of areas in our rural communities that you can still build that aren't ag land. So, there's some opportunities in there, and I think we need to be, creative and looking at things when we talk about equity, that equity just doesn't mean urban high rises when it comes to communities of color. And so I just, want to put that on the table as well.
Thank you. Any others? All right, Casey.
Okay, all right, moving on to the fourth of six. We're almost there. This one could be pretty
We're up
quick.
against the clock here.
Yeah. This one could be pretty quick. Katie, could you move that one more time? Thank you. Pricing and tolling. So the 2020 plan was the first one that included the tolled express lanes and a mileage-based user fee. You've already kind of talked a lot about this, so I'm just going to cut to the question, which is what information would be most helpful for the board to better understand the roadway pricing mechanisms and their importance to managing the region's future transportation network? If you want to share that as questions that you still have, that's also helpful.
I think you should give us an ROI on whatever terms you want, straight up financial return, VMT benefits, congestion benefits. That sort of analysis would be helpful.
Agreed.
And funding, right? So where's the funding going to go to? Expansion of lanes or modification of existing roadways, right? Because that makes a big difference in these conversations. If the state of California, which folks said to us at our mega region, we are not going to fund more highways. No, 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 right? We're not going to fund those. Well, then they're not going to give us more money for expanded or additional lanes, but they might do that for managed lanes. And is that more reasonable to focus on those roadways versus brand new roadways?
Okay, thank you.
Else? Anyone else online? All right, Casey.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to think of what I wanted to say. I think kind of as already brought up, data is really important, right? And understanding the benefits, particularly as we have those conversations and try to have those conversations with our constituents. Kind of back to the whole, what an amazing job it is that SACOG takes board members to experience different types of land use and different type of planning, because then we understand. I would probably feel really differently about tolling had I not had experience driving in toll lanes in the Bay Area and in Southern California and seen the benefit to that personally. It made me a big fan, because it's like, oh, I can pay a little bit of money and not sit in traffic. I love this, right? But what people in the region might hear is, you're going to charge me for a road I already pay for, right? And so,
Well, there's also the equity issue too. I mean, as you just said, those of us that can afford it don't have to wait in traffic.
yeah.
That's something you have to struggle with.
So I guess just big picture, all the benefits and even, how does it help people that maybe are lower income or, that are on transit? I know it helps people on transit significantly, right? And so not that that's everyone that's on lower income, but, for each, how's it benefit everyone, right? I guess, and helping the board understand that as we make those decisions with numbers to the best of the ability, with some data, is helpful, so.
Great. Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to the next one,
How many
revenue.
you got, Casey?
I told you 6. Keeping track here. This is number 5.
It's an advertise.
We're almost through this. Okay. And this one is really, again, this is another one where it's a heads up, and it's also what questions do you have here. So when it comes to revenue, the 2020 plan, your current plan, has 2 local sales tax measures assumed in it, one in Placer County, one in Sacramento County. So we're currently working with PCTPA and STA on how these or alternative sources of revenue should be considered in the long-term plan. I bring this up because your plan has to be fiscally constrained. We have to provide good reason, good evidence for why we include any revenue assumptions in the plan. So given that these 2 are very live, we wanted to make sure that you're aware that that is going to be a question that we have to work on. And so the question for you here today is, what information or discussions would be most helpful to the board in considering how these sources or other critical sources of local revenue could help with advancing the goals of the MTPSCS?
Through the chair.
Yes.
This is more of a question. Has SACOG ever talked about a regional transportation sales tax? I know, I think, is it Denver area? I can't remember if Salt Lake has one. So I know there are some of those. I know even Sacramento has struggled recently to pass a transportation sales tax, which seems like the most likely jurisdiction in the region to pass something like that. So I don't know that it helps, but I know from an outlying jurisdiction, probably very hard to pass something like that. And I almost feel like it might be easier regionally, but I know the drawbacks of that are then it's like, well, I'm spending money and the money's going somewhere else, right? So you have to have an identified list of projects that benefits everyone in the region. You know, I don't know.
I have a lot to say about this. It seems like we're drawing smaller boundaries for sales tax measures than bigger ones.
Yeah.
That's my quick answer. I will say though, let's see how the next two play out, right? We have potentially Placer County, potentially Sacramento County. The legislature has stepped in and done some interesting, that can be helpful sometimes. They drew Marin and Sonoma together in one regional boundary. And as a 2-county region, those voters went to the ballot a while ago and passed the smart commuter rail tax. And Marin could not have done that by itself. So there's some interesting things that happen. I appreciate, Director Bradford, what you're saying. I think it is so hard for this region to get to a 2/3 majority, so hard, that I think what we're talking about is there again, see how these play out in 24. Is there something that the legislature could help us with to, and this will also maybe generate discussion among many of you, but make it easier for us to go as a larger region rather than harder, I don't know. I think, but right now, I think we're, so that's a big one, tall order.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is the appetite amongst the vote. I mean, this is what I do for a living. The appetite amongst voters for, increased tax right now is such a low point that, I mean, I'm not trying to throw cold water on anyone's sales tax measures, but it's just going to be really difficult. I mean, so the assumption, and we'll have to see how they play out if they go forward, but it's just not a good time.
I would agree with that. Any others?
All right, here's your last one.
All right.
You ready? All right. Thanks for hanging with me. Prioritization. Okay, this committee has talked about prioritization of transportation projects at each of your meetings this year. Most recently, you had a presentation from a speaker at MTC in the Bay Area to talk about their efforts to prioritize projects in their quest for federal grants. So the 2025 blueprint will be the first one that we develop that's going to include prioritization of transportation projects within the plan. So your staff right now is developing a process for analyzing transportation projects that takes into consideration the triple bottom line of goals, and then the process to engage with partners and stakeholders on actually doing the prioritization. We feel that prioritization of projects within the blueprint could really help the region all of the sponsors in the region to be more successful in state and federal grant rounds, because those are all competitive. And our goal is to work with cities, counties, the board, and key stakeholders to do this prioritization. So it's the last one because it would be coming later on. It's coming after, we've actually created a transportation portfolio. So next slide, please. The question I have for you here is what questions and concerns should be considered as we plan this engagement with the board, with local governments and key stakeholders to do prioritization of projects within the blueprint? That is my last question for you too.
Anybody?
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Do we anticipate that prioritization is, what implication would prioritization have in SACOG funding rounds, do we anticipate? So in other words, you've got these 2 projects, this one's higher priority, so this one gets the money, or not? I mean, is it, or it's a piece of potentially future funding round metrics when you're scoring things. I mean, I guess I'm just kind of asking, you know, what,
That's, yeah.
if your lower priority, is that like eliminate, you know, pretty much your project's not getting done until everything above it's getting done, or?
Well,
you know,
and
how does
same
that
with
work?
state of California funding, right? California Transport, the CTC or whatever they're called. Would that affect it, right? So they're going to look at projects 1 through 7, but not, you know, 8 through 15. And that would be very frustrating to any project if the prioritization kept somebody out. Especially because the dynamics, the market dynamics change. You know, so could that, right, all of a sudden, you know, I've got somebody who decides they're going to build a huge distribution center in my county, and you've got jobs, which then facilitates the growth of houses.
Yeah.
But that project, maybe we thought it was going to be years down the line, but it ended up getting moved up. So then how does that affect the prioritization? And could the prioritization change over time based on market dynamics? That might be a question.
Yep.
I think certainly. You know, prioritizations, this is probably one of the hardest ones because, you know, you're picking winners and losers, and it's just part of our job.
Yeah.
But I would say we have agreed as a board to look at the triple bottom line. And I would say that every time we look at prioritization, we do it through that lens. And just always stay consistent with what, as a board, that we have laid out as what our priorities are. I know it's redundant and a prioritization question, but as long as we stay consistent, that's what would be important.
Chair Kennedy, there is, I know this committee, as Casey just said, you had this discussion actually in February when you first met this year. We had Georgia Gann from MTC come and talk about the MTC approach. I hear your concerns, and I think they're very valid. However, I would say there is no doubt in my mind that if we had a short list as a region that the region felt good about, we've kind of done this in the mega region working. If we had a short list of projects that people felt like, oh yeah, that's my Yuba County priority right there, that we could rally behind, that not to the exclusion of other projects, we would do better. We would do better. And I think this is going to be asked of us more formally. So the more that we can try, at least try through the blueprint to get there, right? I know it's never an easy thing because the system, the approach we have right now is a lot of applications going to DC. Many of us usually don't hear about them. If we do, it's I'm not sorry, glass half empty here, but it'll be 2 days before it's due, we're asked to sign a support letter for something we didn't know about, or we don't know about it at all. And then back in DC, they're thinking, why do we have this many applications? How are these connected, right? That is not, the way we're currently doing it is not, I don't think is a very effective strategy. But I understand that if we went all the way to the other side, right, we've heard from you already, like, oof, that means I'm not prioritized. So how do I see myself, right, in a regional approach that feels fair? Somewhere in between there, I think, is the sweet spot we want to try to hit.
Yeah, Director Thomas.
As we've all identified, this is challenging conversations, and in the considerations, I will always, want to understand how we are also collaborating with local jurisdictions to make sure that we don't override local control, but collaborate to help ensure that, local jurisdictions, know what priorities will most meet the needs of their communities, recognizing that what SACOG funds, needs to advance what this board has adopted. But also just want to make sure that we're collaborating as we are effectively with local jurisdictions to maintain as much local control as possible.
Anybody else?
I'll just throw in, I do appreciate the example of the mega region in those projects, because I think it's helpful to see that, I think everyone can agree that those really do, all those projects are beneficial to the mega region, right? And they're geographically dispersed across the mega region, so.
Okay, question 27.
That was it. As I promised up front, thank you very much for walking through this with us. And your questions and your feedback were really helpful. We'll be taking this and using it to help us, as I said, design, really hone in on what are the topics that we're bringing to the committees, to the board, and then as we're doing the engagement planning for 2024, really great comments on that. We're going to figure out how we can use this to shape those. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you. Well done. Any other comments?
Chair Kennedy, I just want to introduce Zach Miller back here. Zach is your relatively new Blueprint project manager. His sole job
Sorry.
is, don't do that yet. Don't do that yet, please. No, we're thrilled to have him. We lost our old Blueprint project manager to a fantastic job running another cog down the Central Coast, but New Abraham was the original. So she got a great opportunity. She went for it. She got it. We have Zach on board now, and he did a lot of the work with Casey on this, and really thrilled to have him. So you'll see him around.
Great. Welcome. Welcome. Anyone else? Any other comments? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. Well done, and we are adjourned.